Welcome to this episode of NIPFP podcast. We have with us today a very distinguished guest, one of the foremost experts in public finance in India, Dr. M. G Rao, to talk on some of the emerging challenges on public finance in India now. We all know Dr. Rao's contributions in fiscal federalism, tax policy, expenditure management issues. He has held various important positions both in academia and in policy, including being a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and a member of the 14th Finance Commission. In addition, he has contributed extensively to various government committees constituted by both the union and the state governments. We have also been very fortunate to have him as the director of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy for around a decade, and prior to which he was the director of the Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, and a fellow at the Australian National University. Welcome, Dr. Rao, and it's a privilege to have you on this podcast today. Dr. Rao, when we're talking of the emerging challenges, let's start with the global context. If you look at the current international situation, particularly the West Asia crisis, we are expecting to have several macroeconomic repercussions of that situation. And some of these we expect will spill over as also fiscal risks. What are the key fiscal risks that you foresee, and what strategies would you suggest to navigate through these?
Thank you, Mita, for this interesting episode. And it has been a pleasure being a part of National Institute of Public Finance and Policy for at least half the period it has been in existence, and for 10 years as it's anchoring its progress. You have put the nail right on the head when you started about the West Asia crisis and the fiscal fallout of that. And then the problem is that generally in India, the crisis usually follows some sort of in fact, economic crisis follows some of these exogenous shocks. In fact, if you have seen the 1991 shock, it was Saddam Hussein's adventure into invading Kuwait that increased the oil prices. In fact, they doubled the oil prices, which resulted in actually exploding the economic crisis, which was building up because of the fiscal profligacy that existed before. The fiscal problem, as Martin Feldstein said, is like obesity. You don't really see that you have a problem. And even as the cloth size increases, and even as you start gaining weight, you don't see the risks. But when the risks come, it will come just as, maybe in terms of the heart attack or, building up, blood pressure and various other ailments. But on a daily basis, we don't see this. Similarly here, in fact, it was a beautiful quotation he has in his L.K. Jha Memorial Lecture in 2004. Now, just as like obesity, fiscal problems have been building up and they explode when a crisis comes in. Over a period of time, we have developed a lot of resilience. India is no longer as vulnerable as it used to be. But then on the fiscal side, the buffer is very limited. We have a lot of foreign exchange. reserves, as a result of which, you are able to navigate in the thing. But there are no fiscal reserves, fiscal buffers, and the space is very limited, and because it has been building. So there are immediate consequences in terms of, as I said, further fiscal, deepening of the fiscal, deficit and debt problem. That would also have an impact on crowding out of investment and private investment. That would actually bring down the growth rate, and because of the excessive imports and falling rupee value, there will be increase in the prices. So obviously the Reserve Bank of India will hesitate to reduce the rate of interest, and even if it maintains the rate of interest, the borrowing space available to the private sector or the corporate sector is very limited, with overwhelming proportion or even exceeding the financial sector, household savings of the financial sector being consumed by the government borrowing. So we are likely to have a series of problems because of the war, in terms of deceleration in the growth, increase in prices, increase in depreciating rupee, which is already seen. In fact, if one sees in the fiscal 2026, I'm sorry, 2025-26, among the Asian currencies, Indian rupee was the worst performing, with over 9% depreciation.
Yeah.
So you have all these problems coming up because of the war, and a major culprit of that is because of the fiscal lack of fiscal space.
Okay. That's interesting, Dr. Rao, in the sense that the constraints in fiscal space brings us to this largely discussed issue of fiscal consolidation and adhering to a fiscal discipline question. Now, in the context of fiscal consolidation, I think augmenting revenues as well as rationalizing expenditures, both of these become very critical. So, on the revenue side, what are the key structural challenges that you see, particularly in the context of the goods and services tax, GST, and larger consumption-based taxes? And what would you suggest, and how would you suggest that we expand the revenue base? That has been a challenge in our context.
I would like to answer your question in two parts.
Okay.
One is, what is the nature of the fiscal problem itself? In the initial years, there was, we used to, the government used to borrow, overspend. And this indulgence resulted in, huge borrowing from the Reserve Bank of India, which was monetized by issuing the short-term treasury bills. This was stopped because of the agreement between the finance secretary and the governor of the Bank of India in 1994. The automatic monetization of the deficit was started in 1997. But then the fiscal problems still continued, and in 2003, August 2023, they had the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, where they fixed the targets of fiscal deficit for both the union and the states. And the norm for that was basically the household sector financial savings, which was supposed to be 10% of GDP at the time. And the current account deficit was around 1.5%. That means resort to foreign savings. So leaving 1.5% to the public enterprises, and if we had to earmark 4% of GDP to the corporate sector, you are left with 6%.
Yes.
And that was distributed between the union and the states.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now the point is, right through the period, except in 2007-8, there was never an occasion where the aggregate fiscal deficit of the country was contained at 6%. It has always exceeded. I mean, they changed the FRBM target, they redefined the target, they talked about pausing, they did all sorts of things, but they didn't achieve the target. The other important development that has taken place is the household sector saving, which was 10% of GDP, has sharply come down.
Yes.
Today, in 2023-24, the household sector financial saving as a percentage of GDP is just about 5.2%. Now, even if you take the revised nominal GDP estimates, I'm told it works out to somewhere about 7%, a little over 7%, which means that there has been a sharp decline in that.
Decline. Yeah.
And even the norm, although the norm has continued, we are still, I mean, in fact, at the union level, they are continuing to say that they are going to talk about, 4 point, sort of something like 4% next year, etc., etc. The problem is that again, because of the nominal revision, the GDP revision, the fiscal deficit at the union level itself is 4.8% now. I mean, it's much more. It was 4.3% budgeted, but then if you apply this thing, it becomes 4.8%. So, first problem is that we have never adhered to the targets. Number one. And number two, the targets themselves are unrealistic. Now, there is a time that we go back to the drawing board and revise the targets if you really want a sustainable fiscal policy to be calibrated. And that would be much more harsher. The implications of that in the short run, as I said, because of this war, and given the low resilience that we have on the fiscal side, there will be problems, as an immediate problems. But over a longer period of time, what it does, it reduces the volume of saving and investment in the economy.
Yes.
Now, if you see, 10 years ago, you had an investment rate of 40% of GDP. And today we have an investment rate of 30% of GDP. Now, what happens is that when you do not have fiscal space for the corporate sector, and when much of the household sector financial saving is preempted by the government, the interest rates or the cost of borrowing for the corporate sector goes up.
Yeah.
And, oftentimes they say that, look, corporate sector is not really borrowing. They're not really borrowing because the rate of return on the investment is becoming less than the interest cost. And therefore, they are not able to make investment, and therefore, they are not able to borrow. Even the cushion they have, they would prefer to invest abroad or somewhere else. And then obviously, because of the earlier banking crisis and all that, banks are also not willing to lend.
Yes.
With almost 90% of the financial, formal financial sector being owned by the government, government is able to do it. And in order to keep the government borrowing low, the cost low, they, from time to time they come up with the liquidity infusion and the like. And even though, the studies have shown that even though the overall borrowing, the overall debt to GDP ratio has increased from 72% to 90%, to 80% now.
Yes.
72% before the COVID crisis. The cost of borrowing for the government has declined.
Okay.
Now, which basically talks a lot. So this is the first part of it.
Okay.
So it will have an implication for short term, which I've already talked about, the medium and the long term, where it will impact on the investment and overall growth. And all you were talking about, the Viksit Bharat, will come to a naught unless and until we really start tightening our belt. That's the point that I want to say. Now, this, as you rightly said, has to be done on both revenue, the containment has to be done by both raising revenue and expenditures. GST is an important reform, but it is still reform is a process, not an event. It's not been an easy reform, because the number of people in the coalition are so many that to get a consensus on that and then proceed with the reform is not easy. But they have been able to achieve this. But still there are some basic birth defects in the entire GST. These birth defects need to be corrected. Now, I am not talking about whether you can correct it today or tomorrow. And building a consensus or building a majority opinion with the states is not going to be an easy task, because states don't have revenue handling. And obviously, any change that you want to make about, they will always think about the revenue possibility of revenue loss. But to make the GST the most important reform, because in most countries it has been a money spinner. It has been a money machine. But here it has not turned out to be. Effective rate of GST, that means revenue as a percentage of overall consumption, is somewhere about 7.5, 7.8%. And it used to be 8.5, sort of 9% earlier. It has declined over a period of time. I mean, if you look at the quarterly analysis. And that is declined for a variety of reasons. When the compliance has not picked up and the rates have been brought down and various other things. Yes. Irrespective of that, the more important issue is we need to make GST much more comprehensive.
How do we do that?
Because you need to get rid of most of the exemptions, and the items which are under the compounded list, we should really, we should really bring them back into this. The moment you have the compounded list, you can't get the input tax credit. The major advantage of a GST is the input self-enforcement mechanism through the input by availing the input tax credit.
Input tax credit, yes.
Okay. Now, that's one thing. So, some of the measures like some of the exemptions like legal fees. Laws are not subject to GST. Why are you leaving them out? Okay. Because they will argue the case against you. The possibility of, it has to be much more comprehensive, except for perishables, which you cannot really this thing. All the items should
come
be
under
taxed.
the umbrella.
And the equity for GST has to come from keeping the threshold at a reasonably higher level. My own analysis has shown in Karnataka that the proportion of taxpayers with less than 50 lakhs constituted 92%, and those with more than 50 lakhs is only 8%. Their turnover was just about, these 92% of these taxpayers had a turnover of 10% and a tax payment of 12%. Why are you focusing on minnows rather than whales? Okay. That is the question that one has. If you focus on whales and leave the minnows, that means small little fellows, the equity naturally gets into the place. I mean, you don't have to really make differentiation in the rates, number one. Okay. Number two, the petroleum products and electricity.
Yes.
Now, today you are not really excluding them. And you have excluded them. You are not really, including them in the GST base. As a result, the entire transportation sector has a cascading effect. And transportation sector, that means tax on tax, markup on tax, tax on markups.
Yes.
You have states levying the tax, you have the union government levying the excise duty, on top of it the states levying this thing.
The duty, yeah.
Now, so that makes the tax non-competitive. Your exports become non-competitive, and then economy doesn't get formalized, and as a result, what happens is even the compliance falls, and therefore it's important. But then it's not going to be easy.
Yes.
But then, since I am talking about a longer term, I think this is something which has to be kept in mind, and we need to really make the system. The other thing is another major birth defect that is the recent reform. Now you have reduced the tax rate from 12% to 5%.
5%, yes.
And you have two rates, major rates. One is 5%, the other is 18%.
Yes.
The difference between the rates are so many. And that creates a much more serious problem in terms of, both classification disputes. Many people would like to classify the 18% commodity, or sort of informal markets, or inverted duty structure.
Okay.
So you do need to really deal with this particular thing. I would have been happy if only they had worked better and said that, look, we will have a rate somewhere about 15% and 8%. The difference would have been less. And even though the ideal thing is to have one rate. So 91% of the countries which have introduced value-added tax since 2000 have one rate.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's right. That's the point that I am trying to make. But whatever be the case, in this country we still have this hangover of equity. And as I said, however much you convince saying that the threshold is an issue, this is not going to happen so soon. So in terms of the practicality, this revenue neutral work could have been done, and at least the difference between the two rates could have been reduced. That's one of the major things that I have to say. But more comprehensiveness and better enforcement and use of technology, including artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Yes. You have digital payment system in place.
Yeah.
So they should be in a much better position to improve the tax compliance as you go along.
Okay. So you're basically saying expand the comprehensiveness, and you're saying also think about the sort of the use of technology and
artificial intelligence.
Yeah. So all of these together, hopefully we'll have this and also make GST a lot more comprehensive. You're saying.
And that's the most important thing.
That's the first and foremost that you would suggest. Okay, so now coming to the expenditure side also, we do talk about a lot on the quality of spending, on the need to ensure that public spending translates into effective outcomes. How do we go about doing this? How do you see these? Yeah.
See, this, as I said, whether you raise revenue or expenditure compression is a part of the fiscal tightening process.
Absolutely.
Now, unfortunately, there have been lots of changes in the priorities, both at the union and the state level. There is a greater use of, transfer payments, for electoral gains.
Okay.
And that's been one of the banes.
Okay.
We do talk about the states doing it. The major problem with the states is that of the power sector. despite the accelerated power development program, re-accelerated power development program and various other things that was introduced earlier by the Planning Commission, and later on again and again they come up with things, they have not been able to solve the problem of electricity distribution in the state level.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the amount of money that is lost is enormous. And unless and until we, there are states like Punjab, where the deficit on account of, or the subsidy on account of the power sector itself is almost 3% of state domestic product.
Oh.
Now, if that is the case, their borrowing space is only 3%. What type of infrastructure development can they do?
Yeah.
There are states which have been managing these things very well. But then there are others, in fact, we don't follow the good practices. And in addition to that, there are a number of guarantees that are being given by the states, which is creating a lot of trouble. But the union government is not free from the problem as well. Now you have what is called the Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, where you are covering 850, giving, in fact, this in 2014 they decided to extend this by another 4 years or 5 years. And every year they give, sort of every month 5 kilograms of food grains free to 813 million people. Now the cost of that comes to somewhere about 2.6 lakh crores a year.
Yeah.
Now, and then the Niti Aayog comes up with a figure, a multidimensional poverty figure, which is 11.6%. Now, if your poverty is 11.6%, why do we have to really give 813 million people the amount of the food grains? It's basically a political issue.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Now, and that's the reason why I said we don't realize that belt tightening is important. This is one part of it. 1.1 million employment letters have been given under the Prime Minister's Rozgar Yojana. Now that is the permanent establishment cost that we are creating year after year.
Yeah.
Now I am nothing against creating employment, but then creating employment has to be done through productive enterprises. Then under the Prime Minister PM Kisan Yojana, the union government has been spending, has spent almost 4.6 lakh crore to millions of farmers, landed farmers.
Yes.
Now, nothing against this. Redistribution is a legitimate government activity because the markets don't do it.
Yeah.
But then when you redistribute, you need to realize, you need to at least take into account what is the opportunity cost.
Yes.
Many of the state governments are doing this. They are cutting down on expenditures on education and healthcare and putting the money to guarantees. In Karnataka, for example, 10 years ago, Karnataka's education budget was 18% of the total expenditure. And today it is 10% of the total expenditure.
Oh.
But at the same time, you are spending almost, sort of 52,000 crores on the 5 guarantees you have. Now, people who take the guarantees are happy. But at the same time, it has an opportunity cost.
Yes.
So we do need to change the priorities, and it's not going to be easy. Now, irrespective of whichever party
is in power,
which in power or is contesting election, every party is putting this forth, saying that I am going to give. Tamil Nadu comes out with saying that we are giving 8,000 rupees per head, per voter, for purchasing any equipment that you want.
Yeah.
And
yes.
there are this thing saying that the ruling party is paying some 9,000 rupees in Assam.
Yes.
These are,
Yeah.
it's a problem. I don't know,
Yeah,
sort of
I can
how
see
to
that.
deal with this problem.
Yes, yes. Talking of expenditures, states are the primary entities, bear a substantial part of the public spending. And in that context, their fiscal space, the evolution of their fiscal space, the current fiscal federal framework, particularly with the 16th Finance Commission report also tabled early this year. How do you see the fiscal federal framework and assess the fiscal situation in states? Do you see any constraints there? Do they have the resources and the flexibility to be able to meet the development needs?
I have two observations to make on this. One is 16th Finance Commission's report has in many ways reorganized the sort of the entire reprioritize the thing between the union and the states, let me put it this way. Because I agree that unless and until you put a very serious norm, there is a possibility of profligacy at the state level because they don't raise the revenue.
Yes.
I used to characterize this problem of revenue deficit grants in two statements. In fact, about the finance commissions. One is that they suffer from the tyranny of Bezier. And the second one is they act like fiscal dentists. The tyranny of the Bezier comes because you take the Bezier numbers and make projections.
Yes.
Then be the tax devolution and whatever is the remaining gap, you fill it up.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, those states with very low levels of expenditures, particularly in education, healthcare, and various, even the administrative expenditure, are condemned to suffer the low levels even in the during period, however much greater expenditure. So there is a tyranny that they have to continue.
Yes.
The 6th Finance Commission tried to give them some so general purpose transfers to upgrade this thing, but then general purpose transfers will not do the thing. The fiscal dentistry comes in because you are filling in the budgetary cavities.
Yes.
And cavities become larger and larger over a period of time.
Yes.
But then if only you can really determine these cavities in a much more normative manner and not disallow the expenditures that are that are not necessary, then that has to be done. But to say that we will discontinue with the Article 275 grants, revenue deficit grants, is to throw the baby and retain the bathwater. Basically
Yes.
That's the problem that I have. I would have expected them to, number one, apply much more rigorous norm in determining this thing. There is another problem. Resources of the country belong to the nation. That is the reason why you have a finance commission.
Exactly.
It is not the union government's money.
Yes.
This belongs to the nation and it has to be given. If that be the case, you have only one-sided thing, asymmetric treatment. The states can be penalized for this thing. What do you do with the union government?
Yeah.
There used to be an economist, bureaucrat called Yes Guhan. He used to say, the finance commissions bark at the center, but they bite the states.
Okay.
Now, I think that is the problem. Now, this finance commission is not even barking at the center. That is my problem. The other problem is, the second problem is that revenue deficit grants are gone. But then you have a situation where you have proliferation of centrally sponsored schemes, and these are financed by reducing the divisible pool by charging cesses and this thing. And the Finance Commission says that they have served the purpose. But at the same time, it said that there should be a committee to go into the proper design of the scheme. I mean, these are contradictory.
Yes.
Now, if they have served the purpose, what is the purpose? The purpose, objective of a specific purpose grant is to ensure a minimum standard of service. Now, the Commission says there are more than 80 centrally sponsored schemes. Is there one centrally sponsored scheme out of the 80 where the objective in terms of specifying the standard of service is specified? You see, if you specify that this is the level of expenditure that I will equalize,
Okay.
primary education, elementary education, I mean, you can't equalize the education standard, but at least equalize the level of expenditure. Now, have they been able to do it so many years? Now, the expenditure in Bihar is 1/4 of expenditure in Kerala.
Kerala. Yeah.
Per expenditure per child.
Yes.
Now, so in a situation like that, and then on the poverty elevation, you see that Tamil Nadu getting a per capita much higher amount as compared to Bihar.
Yes.
Now, where is the specification done? Where is the implementation done? I think that requires a massive overhaul and complete. You don't need 80 of them, take 5 of them. And you have something called Namami Gange, where you put a lot of money and then it goes through along with the sewerage. Nothing more that happens. I think we really need, we can't politicize that. We can't tell the state, most of these items, most of these centrally sponsored schemes are on the state subject.
Yes.
Now, why is it that the union government is so much interested in doing the things that are meant for the states? And not only that, ordering 40% of preempting 40% of the financing for them and changing, which is totally against basic rule of the decentralization theorem. Decentralization theorem says that the decentralized unit should be enabled to provide public services according to the varying preferences of the people. Yes. Now you are saying that I have a preference like this, you put your money according to my preference.
40% state share.
So reduce there is a role to play, particularly in respect of those services which have very significant externalities. Because Pigu said that, if you have to have optimal provision, you need to subsidize with those items with externalities. So fine, take 5 of them. And even today, out of the 80, 5 schemes contribute more, and for that the money spent is more than 50%.
Yeah.
So at least focus on them, specify the targets that you want to achieve, monitor the target, and don't change the things from time to time so that they achieve the minimum standards of service. Yeah. And that would reform the entire scheme of things. But is it politically acceptable? That's the question.
I think it's been very enlightening and a lot of things to think about what is the best way forward. Thank you, Dr. Rao.